Welcome to Shooting Straight with Brad and David. I'm David Klaus, your Navajo County Sheriff.
And I'm Brad Carline, your Navajo County Attorney.
So we're at a different location today, a little different set here at Shello TV, but
we decided to bring you to the original Navajo County Courthouse in the jail and talk about some of the criminal history stories that have been with Navajo County since its founding. And there's some great history here, and your family was a part of it since the very beginning, David.
Yeah, so if you look back, what I find one of the most interesting things is we've been a county for over 139, almost 140 years, roughly if my math is right. We've only had two jails, the one we're sitting in and then the one that we've had some remodels over there, but.
Yeah, the Navajo County split off from Apache County in 1895, and they built this jail and the courthouse around it in 1898. And the jail behind us served as the Navajo County Jail to 1976. And I'm almost old enough that I could have been in here if I had gotten in trouble at some time, and I really can't imagine being in this facility.
Yeah, I think capacity, they said, was, and I've read a lot of some of the old sheriff's journals and the history books, the capacity was meant for around 40, maybe. But then there's some of the old jailers that still live in town or work with the sheriff's office. In fact, there's people I've met who talked about spending nights in here. But they said we held way more than 40, and obviously they were coming out here into this open, what we would call a day room today. But they talk about how they were lined up, and then the dispatcher, the call taker, the secretary also prepared the meals for the inmates as well. So it's kind of all in one position back then. And
besides reading the old sheriff journals, you had some personal information because your granddad was a sheriff, wasn't he?
Yeah. So my granddad was, on my maternal side, was Glenn Flake, and he was first elected sheriff in 1960. And prior to that was Ben Pearson. So he actually served in this building as sheriff his first term, and then he later served in 1984 to 88, which would have been.
So he got to see both sets of jails.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know how big the new jail was south of town when it first opened, and how big it is now?
Yeah, so in 1976, when that jail, or that facility, the county complex opened, we still use the original portion of that jail, but of course we've outgrown that since 76. So we still call it the same location, but we've added on pods. We can currently hold 400. We have 400 bed space, but the original in 76 was only about 80.
So not much bigger than what this facility could hold.
Yeah, but exactly. It almost doubled, but they were holding a lot more than 80. But the difference in that, they actually had visitation rooms. They actually did the separation of male and female. They had a booking, instead of all just lumped into one. So although the bed space, the footprint was much larger, but they were able to do what a jail does today with classification and moving prisoners.
It's hard for me to imagine 40 people in this small area. How has the concept of keeping custody of people on charges changed from throwing them in here like sardines to what they built in 76 to what you have now? You mentioned pods. What is a pod?
Yeah, it's completely different. As you can see in here, there's one bathroom, which I think you guys got shots of earlier.
And that was for both men and women at the same time, open.
Yeah, and so the whole concept of having men, women, having different, low-level offender or kind of more serious crimes, having all those things. Of course, record keeping probably wasn't as good back then. They probably just kept a record of who was booked in. Now we keep, obviously, electronic records. We know who's been in, if they had any behavioral issues before, or any tendencies for violence or escape and stuff like that. So that's how you do your classification, how to separate your prisoners. And of course, safety not only for the detention, but safety for the other inmates. And so and then court, we got to have them staged for those that are sentenced, unsentenced for court and all those things.
And here for court, the court was upstairs in this courthouse, so they'd have to go by all the other elected officials' offices to take them into court.
And go right past the front door.
And there have been an occasional escape from this old facility, because I remember reading about, I think it was Sheriff Hatch, getting a posse together to chase after a couple that escaped and were going down to Snowflake and Taylor. And if I remember right, one of the escapees had a .30-30 rifle on him, and Sheriff Hatch actually shot it out of his hands, kind of what you see on TV shows at times that you think is impossible. And then he kept that rifle here in the sheriff's office as a memento with the marks from the bullets. That's just a fantastic story.
Yeah, I think Holbrook has several of those. I think we'll touch on a few of them. But the history of the county is pretty remarkable, and it's fun hearing those old ones. I don't know all the details on Sheriff Hatch, but obviously Hatch, a big local name here in this county and in Holbrook, and yeah, that's a neat part of history right there.
So you've done a lot of research on the sheriffs in the county, the jail, the courthouse. What's one of the stories that really sticks out in your mind?
Of course, I think one of our if you do a tour of the facility, our first sheriff, we were talking before we were recording. He when we split off from
who was it?
Commodore Perry Owens, Sheriff Owens.
Okay.
So when we split from Apache County in 1895, I think he made this. They sent him over to clean up the town, right?
Oh, the whole county, not just but mainly Holbrook.
Yeah, clean up the warrants. I think it was within his first year he had the big shootout at the Blevin residence.
Yeah. Do you remember much about that one?
Yeah. So there was 3 or 4 brothers that had warrants, and I'm not sure if they were Apache County or Navajo County warrants, but he went over there to get warrants, and we assumed
by himself. What just shocked me is going after 4 or 5 people by himself.
And from where we're at here at the complex or the courthouse, I'm not sure. I don't think this courthouse was under construction at the time that shooting took place, or it was under design. So I don't know where the sheriff's office would have been, but imagine it was really close. It would only be a block from here. And so you had these 3 or 4 wanted, and just walks down there armed and calls them out and sees a gun, and then just starts.
He shot the guy in the arm that had the gun, and the others all got their guns.
Yeah, then they all armed themselves, and he shot, I believe he killed 3. Yeah. 3
of the 5. By himself. No, so if you and your deputies were serving 5 warrants and 5 dangerous individuals in a home in the community, would you go by yourself or send 1 deputy?
No. In fact, the standard of kind of law enforcement today, not only the safety of the deputies and the sheriff, but also of those that are in the residence too. You're trying to take without any shots being fired.
And he would go with a lot more people just for safety of everybody, because if there was enough of you, you would think that they wouldn't react with violence because they're surrounded or whatever.
Yeah.
But what kind of man must Commodore Perry have been to just have the fortitude on his own to go in such a dangerous situation?
Yeah, obviously he was the right man for the job, because they said, well, Holbrook was a town too tough for women and children, and I guess there was some lawless. There was the hash knife gang, and
which the town and the street named Bucket of Blood for that shootout at the bar. I can't remember the owner of the bar, but it became known as the Bucket of Blood because there was so much blood on the floor after the shootout that it looked like somebody just thrown buckets of blood on the floor.
Yeah, so Holbrook was truly a Wild West town then. It was a railroad community, and you needed a tough sheriff like that was there, and he took on the mantle of restoring order to the community.
But what is least surprising to me with all these type of stories, like the shootout at the Blevins' house and at the bar that became the Bucket of Blood, there's only been 1 hanging during that era, and that was actually with the 2nd sheriff and not Commodore Perry.
Yeah, Sheriff Waltron was the 2nd sheriff, and I believe this place would have been built around that time. And we were, again, a little discussion about this story was you had to give notice, right?
By statute,
by
the
law.
territorial legislature required notice of a public hanging. So we did get a conviction first before we hung him.
So yeah, I'm sure the county attorney notified the sheriff and says, if you're going to execute this hanging, if you're going to carry out this hanging, you need to do a notice. So what does he do? He sends an invitation to the community and to the governor.
With fancy pre-printed, with all sorts of embellishments and everything else. Almost like a party invitation from looking at it.
And it actually rises to the President of the United States, which I always found that kind of remarkable in reading kind of the histories, that this made it, of course, maybe it was by Pony Express, then I don't know.
Telegraph.
Yeah. So it goes back to Washington, D.C., and I think because the president and the governor, they're all kind of a little bit like, hey, this is not the way it should be carried out, because there seems to be a little bit of pomp and circumstance around it, right?
There should be a somber occasion.
Yeah. So they order a stay, and I believe it was a 30-day. And then what does he do? He waits the 30 days, but does the hanging, but still, from what I've read, he still sends out invitations, but it was after the execution.
And it was kind of snarky, the second invitation, saying, how dare you tell me not to do this and let me not. It had to be an interesting character. It would have been fun to sit down and talk to the guy. Yeah,
and so we actually, in my office, because this is a piece of Navajo County history, we actually still have the old jail record books. The big bank books or record books that they kept, big binders, and we actually use them still today. Probably not back to the late 1800s, but still, when we get public records requests before we went electronic, sometimes records clerks still have to go in there to find stuff that, not real often, but what they've done is they've took a copy of that hanging record of that arrest and that conviction and that hanging, and all the sheriffs, they made a copy of it, and everyone's kind of kept it in the sheriff's office and said, hey, here's the actual entry from that execution.
And we should probably mention the person who was hung here at the courthouse by one of the trees in the front was George Smiley, who was convicted of murdering somebody in the community here. And we'll be remiss without talking about the courthouse being haunted.
Yes.
One of the ghosts that supposedly haunts the courthouse is George Smiley, the one that was hung outside the tree outside of the courthouse. And then there was a woman too. Do you remember her story?
I don't know. I've heard of the two, and when we took a photo outside of here, just like I tried to do some of the old historic photos with some of my command staff. We took one out in the front. I think it was in 2020. The photographer, he mentioned that there's one up in the window, and I said, the Historical Society will tell you the whole story on that.
Yeah, it was supposedly a female inmate who died while she was incarcerated, and she was looking out a window. So people on occasion will see a female, even when the place is closed, staring out the window, longingly for their freedom. And that's what, supposedly came in your photo. And I know that I was upstairs in the judge's law library, and we were doing a quick little video about some of the people that won the awards for the Victim Rights Symposium. And there was all these little light orbs in the video. Were they little mites catching the light coming in, or was it something else?
Well,
but it's fun to come and just decide for yourself what things are.
Yeah, so you look at all these old legends of has to be wrapped around the sheriff's office, which is always seems to be one of the high profile or high liability things that is true today, right? That we saw back in the history. Yes. And it's funny, and it actually is fun reading, because there's only been 18 sheriffs in our history of, like I said, 140. So it is fun to read back and see all that history that's coming.
And on future shows, we'll talk more about some of the history, not only the sheriff's department, but the criminal justice system as a whole. There's been some really interesting criminal cases over the century plus that Navajo County has been a county. So thank you all for joining us this month on Shooting Straight with Brad and David. And we'd like to give a special shout out to the Navajo County Historical Society for letting us film in the old courthouse. And they're open 7 days a week from 9 to 5, so come on down. See the old jail for yourself and the rest of the courthouse. Look at some of the interesting art that the inmates have painted on the walls. And it's just fun, and maybe you'll see a ghost while you're here.